Our gospel lesson today comes from Matthew, even though we've had a Luke year for our gospels for Christmas and Advent. When it's Epiphany, we need to go to Matthew's gospel. So from Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. On the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea. For so it has been written by the prophet, and you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. And then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star they had seen at its rising until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road.
Last chance, Jesse. You're okay with my taking the mask off? He's going to move away. They all are moving away from me. Good morning. I love seeing all your faces. In August of 2013, NASA's Curiosity rover celebrated the one-year anniversary of its landing on Mars by singing Happy Birthday to itself in a Martian crater, 208 million miles from home. Someone commented online that this made them sad because this lonely little rover was all alone. And here's the response that came. "No, guys, you don't understand. The soil testing equipment on Curiosity makes a buzzing noise, and the pitch of the noise changes depending on what part of the experiment the rover is doing. Curiosity is performing what it's supposed to do, and as it does, it hums to itself." So some of the finest minds currently alive decided to take incredibly expensive, important scientific equipment and mess with it until they worked out how to make it sing to itself. The first song ever sung on Mars, Happy Birthday. And then someone made a cake on the birthday and took it into mission control so a room full of brilliant scientists and engineers could throw a birthday party for a non-autonomous robot many million miles away and listen to it sing Happy Birthday. This isn't a sad story. This is a happy story about the ridiculousness of human beings and the way we love messing with things. We built a little robot and called it Curiosity and flung it out into the stars to go and explore places we can't get to yet because its name, Curiosity, is in our nature. And then just because we could, we taught it how to sing. That's not sad, that's awesome. So I have to say, I don't really think this is about ridiculousness. I think this is about the way human beings are driven to storytelling and meaning-making, and I do agree that it's awesome. Which brings us to the Christmas story. We all know it, don't we? the birth of the baby whose birth changes everything. This luminous baby lying in a manger, looked over by his tired teenaged mother and the somewhat dazed stepfather, Joseph, and surrounded by cows and sheep and donkeys, probably chickens, maybe a couple of flamingos, possibly a superhero or two. Throw in some shepherds and angels, then add 3 Oriental kings on camels bearing gifts. Except that story is cobbled together from the only 2 Gospels that even mention the birth of Jesus, Matthew and Luke, and most of the details have been fleshed out, so to speak, embellished by storytelling human beings. There are shepherds in the Bible. Well, then there must be sheep. Jesus is lying in a manger. Well, then there must be cows, donkeys, probably chickens. I made up the bit about the flamingos. There are Oriental kings. Well, then there must be camels. Did you think kings would walk from Persia? And oh, by the way, there are 3 gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Well, then obviously there must be 3 kings. Except that the original Greek said magi, and the author was probably referring to Zoroastrians from Persia, or thereabouts, astrologers. At some point, the 3 were named, Casper, Melchior, and Balthazar, and given origin stories. The Catholic Church even made them saints. Storytelling, meaning-making, it's what we do. Our imaginations supply details, all the details we need to make a good story, to make the bare bones of the story come alive and lodge itself in our hearts. And all the animals you need, add all the animals you need to flesh out the story. And while we're at it, let's imagine the actual journey of the Magi, however many of them there were, because we do really believe they existed, don't we? The impact of this baby's birth must have somehow shaken the foundations of the earth, and the vibrations of that must have been seen in the signs and portents read by distant astrologers. That feels right to me. That feels true in a way that doesn't depend on facts. Barbara Brown Taylor says that a bright star lodged in the right eye of each of the 3. It was so bright that none of them could tell whether it was burning in the sky or in their own imaginations, but they were so wise they knew it didn't matter all that much. The point was, something beyond them was calling to them, and it was a tug they had been waiting for their whole lives. So off they set, being pulled west towards Jerusalem, at which point the star or stars apparently wandered off, leaving them stranded in Jerusalem, because somehow they all decided it would be a grand idea to ask Herod where this new baby king was. I mean, Herod didn't have a great rep. He was pretty much a slimy little client king under Rome's rule. But the writer of Matthew had some points to make here. 1, Herod isn't the real king of the Jews, and presumably he pretty much knows that. 2, here's a good place to bring in some prophecy from the Jewish scriptures, so that when Herod asks his priests and scribes to figure out where the baby king is, they find an answer of sorts in the scroll of Micah, pointing out that the real king, the Messiah, the one to shepherd God's people, will be born in Bethlehem. 3, Herod really is a slimeball, and he wants the Magi to sleuth out the exact location of the baby so Herod can have it killed. By this time, the Magi are wise to Herod's ways and give him a solid, yeah, sure, about coming back to tell him where the baby is. And they go on their way, the stars firmly fixed back in their eyes. And they are again guided, this time to the right place, a place of opening, a place of joy. And we would love to think to a happily ever after sort of life. But I wonder, T.S. Eliot's poem, The Journey of the Magi, imagines a very different story, this one. A cold coming we had of it, just the worst time of the year for a journey, and such a long journey. The ways deep and the weather sharp, the very dead of winter. And the camels galled, sore-footed, refractory, lying down in the melting snow. There were times we regretted the summer palaces on slopes, the terraces and the silken girls bringing sherbet. Then the camel men cursing and grumbling and running away and wanting their liquor and women. And the night fires going out and the lack of shelters and the cities hostile and the towns unfriendly and villages dirty and charging high prices. A hard time we had of it. At the end, we preferred to travel at night, sleeping in snatches with the voices singing in our ears, saying this was all folly. Then at dawn we came down to a temperate valley, wet below the snow line, smelling of vegetation, with a running stream and a water mill beating the darkness and 3 trees on the low sky, and an old white horse galloping away in a meadow. Then we came to a tavern with vine leaves over the lintel, 6 hands at an open door, dicing for pieces of silver, and feet kicking the empty wineskins. But there was no information, and we continued, and arriving at evening not a moment too soon. Finding the place, it was, you might say, satisfactory. All this was a long time ago, I remember, and I would do it again. But set this down. Were we led all that way for birth or death? There was birth, certainly. We had evidence and no doubt. But I had seen birth and death and thought they were different. This birth was hard and bitter agony for us, like death, our death. We returned to our places, these kingdoms, but no longer at ease in the old dispensation with an alien people clutching their gods. I should be glad of another death. Not a very hopeful poem, not one we are comfortable associating with this joyous event. But then this baby didn't come into the world to bring unending joy to that world, despite the Christmas carol. This baby would grow up to shake the world to its very foundations, to leave many folks clutching their alien gods and realizing that they just weren't enough anymore. This man would force many folks to remember and reconsider what is important and what isn't, and to ask his followers to do hard things. Maybe the Magi were the first who had to confront the limitations of their knowledge and their views of the world. Maybe they were the first, outside of a few family members, to realize the possibilities that God was opening up before God's beloved human beings, that God was doing a radically new thing, and that the world had changed forever. So let's continue to imagine the Magi's story. Of course they felt as though some part of them had died, because it had, and resurrection is miserably hard. But they'd already done the hardest thing. They had left their faraway homes led by something irresistible. And now they had to return as different people, unrecognizable people, people who probably made their old friends uncomfortable. The stars that had lodged in their eyes had been replaced by a seed of God that they were now required to carry into the world. They were vessels shaped by God to model a new way of being in their transformed lives. How were they to do that? The Magi chose another road to take them home, not only to avoid Herod, but because any road they chose would have been different, because they were different. They had been changed by their meeting with this baby. And now they had to figure out a new way to be, a new way to live with who they had become. Like the Magi, we need to figure out a new way to be in this world because this world is broken and desperately in need of change. And only those who recognize the brokenness can help to change it. And of course, the world doesn't much want to change. It's running along quite smoothly, working quite well for those with privilege. Why change if you were white, straight, cisgender, and well off? Even if the only privilege you have is white skin, you can still know that you're not at the bottom of the caste system in this country. Making changes could shake up the system, and the system works for some. And here we are at the beginning of a new year, a better year, please God. A year when we must all choose another road. We must choose to be more kind, to try hard to understand where others are coming from, to value empathy above all else, to listen more than talk, but to speak up when we're confronted by injustice. We need to recognize whatever privilege each one of us carries and work to extend that and more to others. We are called to let our lives be shaped by God, to be seeds of God that we carry out into the world.